Do you know what it's like to spend your entire life attempting to solve a single mystery? Well, Detective Anderson does. Throughout over 30 years at work, he answered numerous puzzles for the police, rescued hundreds of robbers, and saved countless lives. There's a significant number of instances that have been successfully resolved in his history. He apprehended a thief at the age of 25 who used plastic to alter his appearance. Anderson had annual surgery when he was 30. Inmates began to escape from prisons across the globe, and the investigator effectively resolved this case. When he was 38 years old, he found the inner sanctum of a prohibited hierarchy in the mouth of a volcano. In his 50s, he was able to clarify the most enigmatic elements in the universe. However, he was aware of something he couldn't figure out. These two enigmas came from the instances of missing aircraft in the 1950s. For the past several years, Anderson has been looking over this information, scrolling through the conundrum. Sadly, he wasn't old enough when this tale started. He had only notes and conjectures. However, he had a startling thought today. It was the first time in a long time that he felt that at last he could crack this puzzle. However, he had to submerge himself to accomplish this once more in this narrative. Thus, he unlocked the wardrobe and took out two vintage publications featuring in-depth features regarding these occurrences. The initial incident took place in the summer of 1955. Pan Am Flight 914 was set to take off on July 1st, leaving the airport in New York with 61 individuals on board. The aircraft was a Douglas DC-4 type. It was not like the current aircraft. It had enormous propellers rather than turbines. Everybody buckled up in their seats. The aircraft began descending the taxiway. The runway swiftly increased in speed, and it lifted off out of sight and up into the sky. Florida was the destination. The journey would be 3 hours. Dispatching agencies were keeping an eye on the plane when, all of a sudden, 914 vanished. The operator attempted to get in touch with the pilot but got no response. This was reported to Florida by New York, which claimed they were also unable to see the plane. Pilots typically alert radio operators if a plane goes down or encounters a storm, but not this time. Following multiple fruitless attempts to establish the connection, they initiated extensive search efforts. The plane's communication was stopped while it was passing over the Atlantic Ocean. As a result, the airline had to acknowledge that the plane went into the liquid. However, there was no evidence in this version. When aircraft fall in that manner, rescuers typically discover debris in the water. Certain areas of the cabin or the bags always reach the top. Rescuers this time discovered nothing. There were no distress signals from the aircraft, and it left no evidence of the collision. It appeared as though it simply vanished into vagueness. For 37 years, people forgot about this tragedy. Years later, something strange occurred. In 1992, at Caracas Airport in Venezuela, the control tower was alerted to an unknown plane approaching. It was strange, as it wasn't anticipated. There were no scheduled flights. While the aircraft was landing, the remainder of the airport and the dispatcher employees recognized that this plane appeared outdated, with massive propellers as opposed to turbines. Upon landing, the pilot made contact with the airport. "Where do we stand?" he asked. He was requested to identify himself by the dispatcher. Shortly after, he responded, "Pan Am Flight 914 has departed from Florida to New York with 57 passengers and 4 crew members on board." The dispatcher was unsure of what action to take next. He and the airport personnel comprehended what type of aircraft they were examining. What was this plane doing 37 years later and around 1240 kilometers from its final destination? A few seconds later, the startled dispatcher activated the microphone and stated, "September 9, 1992 is the date. Are you aware of that?" After a protracted silence, the pilot answered in a panic, "Oh no! Where are we, Jimmy? Move aside. Let's head out." The pilot was seen waving his hands horrified through the window. Afterward, he fired up the engines and moved the aircraft to the runway. Pan Am 914 accelerated, and the dispatcher attempted to halt him, but the pilot did not react. The aircraft vanished into the sky, leaving no trace behind. Nothing has been known about it ever since that day. Detective Anderson completed perusing the reports. He scowled as he peered out the window, raindrops striking the glass. The outside storm was perfectly captured. What was going through his head at that moment? He appeared to be aware of what had transpired to that aircraft. Every hint was there, conveniently placed in front of his eyes. But to be certain, Anderson had to proceed to the following case. It was an additional 1989 article. It took place in 1954. Flight 513 of Santiago Airlines took off, departing from the airport in West Germany, expected to arrive in Brazil in 18 hours. It comprised 4 crew members and 88 passengers. Hidden behind the clouds, the aircraft vanished from every radar. Controllers of air traffic were attempting to reach out to the pilots, but never heard back in response. They called the airport 18 hours later in Brazil. The dispatchers were unable to verify this plane's landing and were unable to get in touch with the pilots. The search process took several days and months, but they discovered nothing similar to the case of Pan Am 914. The aircraft vanished from radar while crossing the Atlantic Ocean in flight. After 2 years, the search operation was terminated and Santiago Airlines stopped operating. Events on October 12, 1989, took a strange turn. Brazilian airport controllers observed a passenger aircraft that materialized out of nowhere. They noticed it, but it didn't address the inquiries from airport employees and merely passed over the airbase in a circle. The jet touched down a little while later, and nothing happened. Passengers did not open the ramp by themselves, and the pilots did not respond to the call to get out. The airplane was in flawless shape. A dispatcher realized that this was Santiago Airlines Flight 513, which had been previously deemed lost for 35 years. As airport employees got closer to the aircraft, what they saw as they opened the doors frightened them, along with the police, customs officers, physicians, investigators, and other airport employees who congregated around the aircraft. There was no one alive on board who could tell the reality. The plane had vanished in 1954 and emerged in flawless condition 35 years later, devoid of any harm. Nobody has yet discovered what occurred. Detective Anderson became aware of the reports. They were strikingly similar. The Pan Am 914 vanished in 1955, and Santiago Airlines Flight 513 disappeared in 1954. The disparity was over a year, Anderson observed, rubbing his head over one more small detail. Both aircraft vanished from radar as they were passing over the Atlantic Ocean. Several myths exist concerning ghost ships and enigmatic events related to the Bermuda Triangle. Agent Anderson was aware of these stories, but the 2 missing planes perplexed him. After examining 2 publications, he found that everything was just as the answer was there, directly before his eyes. Both narratives were composed in the same newspapers, lacking a true dispatcher who had no communication with the planes and was not aware of the passengers' situations. Newspapers, aside from this one, published information regarding these missing planes, as if they were simply using the same tale and altered the names, dates, and locations of the airplanes. Not all of the passengers were lost, however. They were seen long after. There were documents dated 1845. One unidentified physician from Mexico City described 100 Italians who emerged out of nowhere in the metropolis, and they were all eccentrically dressed and conversed regarding a single enigmatic train. This entire narrative was made up. There was no documentation or evidence of the individuals who boarded the train. Something loud shattered his reverie. Detective Anderson answered the phone. He was listening to the individual on the other side of the call. After a minute, he responded, "Indeed." The investigator hung up the phone. For him, it was a fresh enigma. Residents in the Sahara Desert observed a massive ship lost in the Pacific Ocean 27 years before. There was no personnel, no cargo on board, and no flags. Nobody was aware of how it emerged among the mud, but it was covered in moist sand. Due to moisture, the ship appeared to have just been teleported there from the water. This time, there were no phonies. Detective Anderson put on his cap and departed from the workplace. But that tale is for a different video.